Have you ever felt, guilty about not being productive enough? Like you didn't check enough off your to-do list? Well, wait until you hear about the guy we're looking at today.
Oh, yeah. It is a story that completely shatters our modern baseline for what actually constitutes, like, a hard day's work.
Seriously. Okay, let's unpack this. We were looking at a stack of incredibly rich and frankly just mind-blowing source material for this deep dive. Specifically, we are looking at translated excerpts from a massive ancient encyclopedia.
Right. The natural history.
Exactly, the natural history. It was written in the 1st century AD by a Roman official named Pliny the Elder. And alongside that text, we have these deeply personal, highly detailed biographical accounts written by his nephew, who is, rather conveniently, named Pliny the Younger.
Yeah, and we are incredibly fortunate to have those letters from the nephew. I mean, without them, we would have the encyclopedia, which is this monumental achievement on its own, obviously. But we wouldn't have the behind-the-scenes documentation of the agonizing, almost superhuman physical and mental toll it took to actually create it. We just wouldn't know the human cost of the text.
Right. And our mission today for you listening is to explore those mind-boggling daily habits and the incredibly strict time management that Pliny the Elder used to conduct his research.
It really is extreme.
It is. We're going to contrast his relentless hustle with our modern views on productivity, but I think most importantly, we want to unpack the immense pressure he faced because he wasn't just, sitting in a quiet, sunlit library all day writing.
No, not at all.
He was balancing high-ranking, literal life-and-death imperial duties for the Roman Empire with this completely obsessive literary goal.
And that tension right there is the core of his existence. The friction between his public life and his private obsession is really the engine of this whole narrative.
So before we look at how he worked, we have to understand what he was actually juggling, because he wasn't a monk in a quiet cell.
Far from it.
He was a highly active, heavily relied upon Roman official.
If you look at the timeline of his life, his resume reads like an absolute powerhouse of Roman administration and military service.
Yeah.
To give you a sense of the scale, in his early 20s, he was serving in Germany as the commander of an ala.
An ala.
Yeah, which is a troop of auxiliary cavalry.
Right, which means he isn't a desk jockey. He is on horseback, leading soldiers in one of the most brutal, freezing, and heavily contested frontier zones of the entire Roman Empire.
Exactly. He is out there managing logistics, supply lines, combat readiness, all in the mud and the snow of the Germanic frontier. And yet, even then, he was writing.
Wait, really? While on the frontier?
Yeah. While commanding this cavalry unit, he wrote a technical treatise called On the Use of the Javelin by Cavalry.
That is just so perfectly specific. I mean, you're trying to keep your men alive in the terrifying German forests, and you just think, you know what I should do tonight? Write a manual on projectile physics from horseback.
It's wild. And he didn't stop there. He traveled all over Germany, going as far as the shores of the North Sea. But, his career evolved. He eventually returned to Rome, worked as a lawyer for a while, and then we hit the reign of the Emperor Nero.
Ah, Nero, which is a crucial period to understand, because Nero's reign was a terrifying time to be anybody of note in Rome, let alone a prominent intellectual.
Oh, absolutely. It was an era defined by paranoia, purges, forced suicides. If the emperor thought you were a threat, or even just annoying, you were gone.
And I want to dig into that survival aspect.
Yeah.
Because the source material notes that during Nero's reign, Pliny wisely stepped back from writing contemporary history. Instead, he wrote a book on grammar.
Yeah, he did.
That feels like a very deliberate, calculated pivot, right?
It's an absolute intellectual survival mechanism. When you live under an autocrat who might literally have you executed for implying the wrong thing in a historical text, you hide your mind in the mundane.
That makes total sense. Grammar is politically safe.
Exactly. It's structural, it's objective. You can't really be accused of treason for debating the conjugation of a Latin verb. So he kept his head down, focused on syntax, and survived the purges.
Smart guy. And once Nero is gone and the political climate finally stabilizes under the new emperor, Vespasian, Pliny's career absolutely skyrockets.
It really takes off.
The sources say he became a procurator in nearer Spain. What does that actually look like on a day-to-day basis in the Roman world?
Well, procurator in this era was a high-ranking financial and administrative official appointed directly by the emperor. nearer Spain, which is roughly modern-day eastern and southern Spain, was this massive, wealthy province.
So he's not just doing some light accounting.
No, no. He was overseeing the tax collection of millions of people. He was managing the imperial estates, the incredibly lucrative silver and gold mines of the region, and he was the chief financial magistrate.
Wow.
Yeah. If there was a dispute over land, taxes, or trade, it landed on his desk. It was a crushing bureaucratic weight. And remember, there were no spreadsheets, no instantaneous communication.
Right, no email.
Exactly. It's entirely managed through couriers on horseback, wax tablets, and just sheer administrative force.
And later, he's appointed as the prefect of the Roman fleet at Misenum, which means he is the admiral in command of the most important naval base on the western coast of Italy.
Which is a huge deal.
Yeah. He's tasked with protecting the grain ships that literally kept the population of Rome from starving and rioting.
Yes, he is the logistical anchor of the empire's food supply. And to top it all off, he was deeply embedded in the inner circle of imperial power. He was personal friends with the Emperor Vespasian and Vespasian's son, Titus.
The same Titus he dedicates the encyclopedia to, right?
The very same. In fact, he dedicates the natural history to Titus explicitly.
So, just to put this in perspective for you listening, imagine you are a modern cabinet member. Let's say you're the Secretary of Defense or maybe the CEO of a massive global logistics company.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You are actively managing international crises, anti-piracy operations, multi-billion-dollar budgets. And while doing that, you decide you are going to write all of Wikipedia.
All of it.
From scratch, during your commute.
That analogy actually works perfectly, provided we add the caveat that you don't have the internet. And every single piece of information you need requires someone to physically carry a fragile scroll to you from across the Mediterranean.
It's just, how is this humanly possible? Looking at the source material, I kept asking myself, was his imperial career just a side hustle to his writing? Or was the writing a side hustle to the empire?
Well, what is so striking about the nephew's letters is that they seem to be entirely parallel, fully realized lives. He didn't sacrifice his public duty for his private study, and he absolutely refused to sacrifice his private study for his public duty.
But something has to give, right?
Exactly, and the pressure he operated under is palpable in the text. In his dedication to Titus, he explicitly acknowledges this friction. He tells Titus that he composed this massive work at interrupted intervals, indeed during the night.
Wow, during the night.
Yeah. Since he was managing the empire's finances and navies during the day, the only place he could steal the hours required for his true passion was from his own sleep.
Which brings us to the output itself. We have to quantify what he actually produced during those stolen night hours, because the sheer volume defies belief.
It really does.
Despite this incredibly demanding day job, he wrote a 37-book encyclopedia. It contained 20,000 distinct topics. And he curated this information by reading and extracting from 2,000 separate volumes written by 100 select authors.
We really have to pause and consider the physical logistics of that research.
Yeah.
Because ancient Roman scrolls, which were made of papyrus, were incredibly unwieldy.
Right, it's not like opening a paperback.
Not at all. They didn't have pages you could flip through. They didn't have an index at the back. They didn't have a table of contents or page numbers.
So how do you even find anything?
That's the thing. To find a specific fact about, say, a random species of bird, you had to physically unroll feet of fragile papyrus, scanning these dense blocks of handwritten text with your eyes until you finally found the reference.
That sounds exhausting.
Doing that across 2,000 volumes, without a search function, in a world lit only by fire, it is a staggering feat of physical endurance, not just mental acuity.
So because his days were entirely owned by the Roman Empire, Pliny had to conquer the night, which leads us directly to this letter from his nephew, written to a friend named Macer.
Ah, yes, the famous Macer letter.
This letter details his uncle's daily routine, and here's where it gets really interesting. And honestly, for anyone listening who likes their sleep, a little terrifying.
It is the ultimate, unfiltered blueprint of ancient hustle culture.
Listen to this schedule. His nephew writes that Pliny began his intense studying at the festival of Vulcanalia. For context, that's August 23rd in the Roman calendar.
Right.
And he would start late at night. But in the winter, when the nights were longer, he would start at 1 a.m. or at the absolute latest, 2 a.m.
And the nephew actually notes that he would often begin by midnight.
Let that sink in for a second. He is waking up at midnight or 1 a.m. in the freezing Roman winter. There's no central heating. And he is reading these massive scrolls by the dim, flickering, probably really smoky light of an oil lamp.
Just brutal conditions for your eyes, too.
Yeah. Then, before daybreak, while it is still pitch black outside, he leaves his house and goes to the Emperor Vespasian, because apparently the emperor also worked nights.
It's such a fascinating detail. You really have to wonder why the Emperor of Rome is holding meetings in the dark.
Right, why not just wait until 9 a.m.?
Well, it's because the daytime in Rome for a person of power was completely consumed by the salutatio, which is this endless line of clients, petitioners, senators, and citizens demanding favors, legal rulings, and money.
So the emperor was basically in back-to-back meetings all day.
Exactly. The only time Vespasian could actually run the structural logistics of the empire, the real work, was before the city woke up. So you have these two insomniac workaholics running the Roman Empire by lamplight.
That is quite an image. They conduct state business before the sun even comes up. Then Pliny returns home. He eats a light, old-fashioned repast, which his nephew notes to emphasize his austerity.
Right, he's not indulging in those decadent Roman banquets you always hear about.
No dormice and honey for Pliny. Then, if he had any so-called leisure time, he would lie in the sun. But he's not relaxing.
Of course not.
In Rome, lying in the sun was often a prescribed medical or relaxation therapy, but Pliny corrupts it with work. While he's lying there, a book is being read aloud to him by a secretary, and Pliny's constantly taking notes and making extracts.
And this is where the nephew shares Pliny's absolute guiding maxim. His uncle used to say, "There is no book so bad, but that some good may be got out of it."
No book so bad. That single sentence is really the skeleton key to his entire methodology, isn't it? He wasn't a curator, he was a vacuum cleaner.
That's exactly it. He was an absolute glutton for information. He didn't care if the text was widely considered low quality or dubious or even just badly written. His goal wasn't to read only the masterpieces. His goal was to extract every solitary data point that existed in the world.
But looking at this from a modern perspective, it sounds like a toxic tech bro morning routine taken to an absurd, almost pathological extreme.
Oh, for sure.
You know those videos where a guy says, I wake up at 3 a.m., take an ice bath, read a book on stoicism, trade crypto, and visualize my goals before the sun rises?
The optimization videos, yeah.
Exactly. Pliny was waking up at 1 a.m. to read by candlelight before a literal board meeting with the emperor. It sounds profoundly unhealthy.
It does. It sounds awful. And if we want to understand why he did this, we really have to look past modern concepts of productivity. He wasn't trying to optimize his workflow or get a promotion.
Right, he already had the top job.
Exactly. He had a deeply philosophical, almost existential reason for this self-inflicted torture. In his own dedication to the natural history, he gives us the key. He writes, "Life properly consists in being awake."
Life properly consists in being awake. Man, that is a heavy statement.
It's the core of his worldview. To Pliny, sleep wasn't rest. Sleep was not a biological necessity to be respected. Sleep was a necessary evil, a physical weakness.
Like a glitch in the human body.
Yeah, he viewed it as a theft of conscious existence. He basically thought of sleep as a localized death. Every hour he spent sleeping was an hour he was not truly alive because he was not actively consuming or recording information about the universe.
Which is such a massive contrast with how we view high performance today. Right now, if you listen to the best productivity experts, neuroscientists, athletes, they all prioritize rest.
Absolutely. It's all about recovery now.
They talk about REM sleep, circadian rhythms, establishing boundaries, and the dangers of cognitive burnout. For Pliny, the very concept of a boundary was offensive. His view was pure, unadulterated volume. The more hours your eyes are open, the more life you have lived.
And because he viewed time as his most precious, rapidly depleting commodity, he didn't just wake up early. He micromanaged the minutes. He squeezed every single drop of utility out of every waking second.
Let's walk through the rest of his day to prove that point, because the intensity never drops.
Never.
After this sun reading session we just talked about, the nephew says he would take a cold bath, again with the cold plunges. Then another slight meal, a very short nap, presumably because his biological hardware was literally crashing.
Right. He was probably passing out.
Yeah, and then he would wake up as if a new day had started and study relentlessly right up until dinner.
And we shouldn't assume dinner was a break either.
Definitely not. During dinner, yet another book was read aloud to him. And there's this incredible anecdote his nephew shares that just perfectly illustrates how intense and, frankly, exhausting it must have been to be around this guy.
Oh, the pronunciation story.
Yeah.
It tells you everything you need to know about his mental state.
Yes. So there at dinner, a book is being read aloud by a slave or secretary. The reader mispronounces a word. A friend of Pliny's, who is a guest at the dinner table, stops the reader, corrects the mispronunciation, and makes the poor guy repeat the word correctly.
Which is pretty normal. Right.
Yeah, maybe a little pedantic, but a normal interaction. But Pliny turns to his friend and absolutely scolds him. He asks, "You understood him, didn't you?" The friend says, "Yes, I understood the meaning." Pliny replies, "Why then did you make him go over it again? Through this interruption of yours, we have lost more than 10 lines."
He was literally auditing his minutes. Think about the mindset required to calculate the opportunity cost of a dinner table correction in terms of lost lines of text.
It's obsessed.
Completely. 10 lines of text lost to a pronunciation correction was an unacceptable deficit in his daily ledger of knowledge.
I try to imagine being his friend at that dinner party. You're just trying to enjoy your olives and your wine after a long day in Rome, and the host is furious at you because you cost him 10 sentences of a scroll.
You'd never accept a dinner invitation from him again.
Exactly. But honestly, it gets crazier. The nephew writes that when he retired to the country, the only time he wasn't actively studying was when he was physically submerged in the bathwater.
And the nephew makes a very specific distinction here.
He does. He says that while Pliny was out of the water, being scraped with ostrigil, which, for those who don't know, was this curved metal tool the Romans used with scented oil to scrape sweat and dead skin off their bodies.
Right, instead of soap.
Yeah, so even during that physical scraping, he was having a book read to him, or he was actively dictating notes to a secretary.
It's important to understand that the Roman bath was the ultimate social and leisure space. It's where you gossiped, relaxed, networked, and unwound. Pliny turned it into a hostile work environment.
He brought the office to the spa.
Exactly. There was no dead time. None.
Even travel was optimized. He absolutely refused to walk when he was in Rome. He would only take a litter, which is a covered chair or carriage carried by enslaved people, so that he could continue reading.
Because walking requires looking where you're going.
Right. Walking was a waste of time because the physical act of navigating the streets required your eyes, meaning you couldn't read. His secretary sat right by his side in the litter with a book and writing tablets.
And there's this one detail about the litter that I just can't stop thinking about.
Gloves.
Yes. In the winter, the secretary actually wore gloves so that the freezing cold wouldn't stop the note-taking.
That is wild.
That detail about the gloves is so evocative because it really highlights the mechanical reality of his work. Roman dictation was usually done on wooden tablets coated in wax, using a sharp metal stylus.
Okay, so you're carving into wax.
Yeah. And if you are bouncing around in a litter in the freezing Roman winter, your hands get stiff, and the wax itself gets hard and difficult to carve into.
Oh, man.
You can just picture this poor Roman scribe shivering in a litter, his hands wrapped in crude winter gloves, desperately pressing the stylus into cold wax to keep up with Pliny's relentless machine gun dictation as they bump along the noisy cobblestones.
I feel so bad for that secretary. And what was the result of all this? The nephew says that, aside from the natural history itself, when Pliny died, he left behind 160 volumes of notes written extremely small on both sides of the parchment.
An unbelievable amount of data.
But I have to push back on this entire methodology. I mean, I have to ask, if you were so obsessed with speed that you get angry about losing 10 lines of text to a pronunciation error, are you actually synthesizing knowledge? Or are you just hoarding data?
That is the big question.
It feels like having 500 browser tabs open. You tell yourself you're doing deep research, but really you're just skimming and aggressively bookmarking things you'll never truly process.
I see the temptation to use the browser tab analogy, but I actually think it doesn't go far enough in explaining his situation. Having browser tabs open implies you can easily click back and search through them later.
But that's true. He couldn't just control F his notes.
Exactly. Pliny's situation was more like trying to download the entire internet onto a physical hard drive while someone is actively chasing you and there is no search function. It wasn't just skimming, it was an archival panic.
Archival panic. I like that phrase.
But your critique is exactly right, and it is the exact critique that modern historians have of Pliny. This manic, unfiltered, high-speed consumption explains the precise nature of the natural history itself.
Because he couldn't filter it.
Right. Because of how he worked, Pliny was essentially a compiler. He was a human search engine. He was not a critical evaluator of the information he was consuming. His time management system entirely prioritized breadth and speed over deep skeptical vetting.
Right. So, if you read 2,000 scrolls while writing in litters, waking up at midnight, and being scraped in the baths, what exactly does your final product look like? Let's actually look at the source text of the natural history itself, because the text is wild.
Oh, it's all over the place.
It is a total roller coaster of profound scientific observation right next to absolute unhinged nonsense.
It is the ultimate mixed bag of antiquity.
Let's start with the brilliant stuff, because we have to give the man his due. When he is right, he is astonishingly right. His astronomical observations are incredibly accurate for the time.
Very impressive stuff.
He correctly explains the mechanics of eclipses. He writes that the eclipse of the moon is caused by the Earth coming between the sun and the moon, and he specifically notes that the shadow of the Earth forms a pyramid or a cone shape, which is why it covers the moon the way it does.
And he understands the phases of the moon perfectly.
Yes. He even notes that the planet Venus is called Lucifer when it appears in the morning, and Vesper when it appears in the evening, recognizing that they are not two different stars, but the exact same celestial body.
And what's crucial there is how he frames that knowledge. He takes a very strong, philosophically advanced stance for science over superstition.
Because eclipses were scary back then, right?
In the ancient world, an eclipse was terrifying. People thought it was the end of the world. But he explicitly mocks people who believed that an eclipse is a sign of witchcraft, or those who beat pots and pans in the streets to save the moon from being swallowed by a monster.
He's just rolling his eyes at them in the text.
Exactly. He champions a rational, mechanical, predictable universe in those passages. He is acting as a beacon of enlightenment.
He is. But then, we turn the page. Because of his cardinal rule that no book is too bad, he includes some of the most bizarre folklore imaginable, and he reports it with the exact same straight-faced academic tone he used for the eclipse.
There we go.
We're talking about elephants that can trace Greek letters.
Ah, yes. The highly literate elephants.
He rates that an elephant was taught to write Greek words in the sand. I mean, come on. He also records stories of people living for impossible lengths of time, like a king of the Lutmiae who supposedly lived to be 800 years old.
Just casually dropping an 800-year lifespan into a history book.
Yeah, and my absolute favorite, he writes about a giant octopus at Cartia, which was a town in Spain that used to climb out of the sea, walk on land, and steal salted fish out of open pickling tubs.
We have to give some context to the octopus story because it's so vivid.
Please do.
The Romans produced massive amounts of garum, which was a fermented fish sauce that was an absolute staple of their diet. They put it on everything.
Like ancient ketchup.
Exactly. And they would leave these huge vats of salted fish out in the sun to ferment. So the visual of a giant ancient octopus hauling itself out of the ocean, slithering into a Roman fish sauce factory, and raiding the vats in the dead of night is just incredible.
It's hilarious. Imagine reading an encyclopedia today, and between the entry on thermodynamics and the entry on plate tectonics, there is a totally serious article about a fish-stealing octopus.
It's definitely jarring.
And alongside the brilliant and the bizarre, you have these obsessively minute details where he suddenly focuses in like a laser. He spends an extraordinary amount of time breaking down the exact process of harvesting the murex snail, which the Romans used to make Tyrian purple dye.
And that detail is invaluable to historians because Tyrian purple was the color of the emperors. It was staggeringly expensive.
And gross to make. He details exactly how the tiny vein in the snail is extracted, how it's steeped in salt for exactly 3 days, no more, no less, and then he explains the chemistry. It has to be boiled in tin vessels, specifically tin, by applying a moderate heat through a pipe connected to a distant furnace.
He really gets into the weeds there.
So we have to ask, what does this bizarre amalgamation of facts mean for us as readers today?
Well, when we look at this text, we are seeing the direct, unedited output of his daily routine. When your secretary is wearing gloves to take notes in the freezing cold, while you bounce around in a litter on your way to a meeting with the emperor.
You're not stopping to fact-check.
Exactly. You simply do not have the time to stop and fact-check whether an elephant can actually write Greek. You don't pause to ask if an 800-year-old king makes biological sense. You just document it. You write it down, catalog it, and demand the next scroll.
He was a victim of his own ruthless efficiency.
He really was. It's a testament to the dangers of information overload without curation. And that is a profoundly relatable problem for you listening right now.
Oh, totally.
We live in an era where we are bombarded with data, articles, feeds, and hot takes. If we just consume, if we prioritize the sheer volume of our inputs without pausing to evaluate, synthesize, or question them, we end up building our own mental encyclopedias filled with the modern equivalent of fish-stealing octopuses.
That is such a great point. Pliny's work is a monument to human curiosity, but it's also a glaring warning about the limits of human cognitive bandwidth.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've established how he worked. The 1 a.m. wake-ups, the cold baths, the relentless dictation in the litter. And we know what he produced, this massive, chaotic, brilliant, and bizarre text.
Right?
But the question that keeps bothering me as I read this is why? What was the engine inside this man? What drove a highly successful, extraordinarily wealthy Roman official to punish his own body and mind this way?
It's the million-dollar question.
He didn't need the money. He didn't need the fame. He was already in the emperor's inner circle, so why do it?
To answer that, we have to look closely at his underlying philosophy, which he lays out quite explicitly in Book 7 of the Natural History. And what we find there is surprising and honestly a little heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Pliny had a deeply pessimistic, almost grim view of human life.
He really did. Reading the opening of Book 7 is actually quite depressing.
It is. He begins by examining the human condition from birth, and he calls man the only tearful animal.
The tearful animal.
Yeah, he looks at human infancy and sees nothing but frailty and vulnerability. He points out that other animals are born with armor like shells or thick fur or claws, and they know instinctively how to swim or walk or hunt.
But humans.
But a human infant is born naked, cast onto the bare earth, capable of doing absolutely nothing but crying. He views human existence as being inherently fraught with disease, vulnerability, and inescapable sorrow.
That's a really bleak outlook. And crucially, and I think this is the linchpin to his entire psychological profile, he entirely rejected the idea of an afterlife.
Yes, completely.
He writes very clearly, all notions of immortality are a mere delusion. He explicitly states that after death, the soul has no more existence than it had before birth.
Just nothingness.
Right. He thinks the very idea of a future existence is ridiculous vanity born of human arrogance. In his words, this delusion spoils that greatest blessing of nature death. He actually believed that sudden absolute death was the greatest blessing nature could grant to a human being because it was a release from the suffering of consciousness.
It's a very stark, stoic, almost nihilistic perspective.
This is where I want to offer an analogy because this blew my mind when I was reading it. Is his insane work ethic the ancient equivalent of existential FOMO?
Existential fear of missing out. I like that.
Think about it. If you truly, deeply believe that there is absolutely nothing after death, that your consciousness will just be snuffed out like a candle flame, forever does that create an unbearable, crushing pressure to consume every piece of information, to read every book, to know every single fact about the world before the clock runs out.
I think you've captured the psychological mechanism perfectly.
Yeah.
If we connect this to the broader picture of his cosmology, Pliny believed that the world itself, the physical universe, was divine.
Nature was God to him.
Exactly. He writes that the world is a deity eternal without bounds. So he doesn't believe in a personal God who cares about humans, and he doesn't believe in a personal soul that survives death. Therefore, his only way to commune with the divine, his only way to touch eternity, was to understand the natural world as completely as possible while he was still breathing.
His productivity wasn't about ambition at all. It was an existential coping mechanism.
Precisely. He was trying to swallow the universe before the universe swallowed him. The frantic note-taking, the anger over the lost 10 lines at dinner, the absolute refusal to sleep. It was all a desperate, unwinnable race against the void.
Wow.
He was trying to cram the infinite majesty and detail of nature into a finite, fragile human life.
Which brings us to the tragic and frankly incredibly cinematic climax of his life. The final deadline.
The ultimate deadline.
Because this relentless drive, this absolute uncompromising commitment to both his imperial duty and his scientific curiosity eventually led him straight into the most famous volcanic eruption in human history.
The eruption of Mount Vesuvius, August 79 AD.
Let's set the scene based on the letters. Pliny is stationed at Misenum, commanding the Roman fleet. He is the admiral. It is early afternoon, about 1 p.m.
Just a normal day so far.
It's just a normal day. His sister, who is Pliny the Younger's mother, points out a strange cloud appearing over the Bay of Naples. The nephew describes it beautifully in his letters. He says it looked like a pine tree, a massive towering trunk of smoke rising up into the sky and then spreading out at the top into branches.
And it's amazing because modern volcanologists actually call this a Plinian eruption, based entirely on this specific, accurate description from the nephew's letter.
That's so cool that his name lives on in the science. But what is Pliny the Elder's first instinct when he sees this apocalyptic cloud?
Scientific curiosity. Of course it is.
She is the guy who wrote the encyclopedia. He doesn't panic. He immediately orders a light Liburnian vessel, which is a fast, maneuverable ship, to be got ready so he can sail across the bay and get a closer look at this geological anomaly.
He just wants to go study it.
Yeah, he even asks his nephew if he wants to come, and the nephew says basically, no thanks, you gave me homework to do, I'm going to stay and study.
A decision that undoubtedly saved the nephew's life, by the way.
Definitely. But as Pliny the Elder is walking out the door of his villa, carrying his writing tablets, because of course he always has his tablets, the situation shifts. He receives a message.
Right, a courier arrives.
Yes, and his second instinct kicks in, imperial duty. He gets a desperate written plea for help from a woman named Retina, whose villa was at the foot of the mountain. The ash is already falling, and her only possible escape route is by sea.
She's trapped.
She is. So Pliny immediately changes his plans. He drops the idea of a simple, fast scientific observation trip. He orders the large, heavy quadrireme galleys to be launched. He is going to sail the Roman fleet directly into the disaster zone to save the coastal population.
This moment is the synthesis of his entire identity.
It really is.
The commander of the Roman fleet and the obsessive naturalist merge perfectly. He's going to perform a massive rescue operation, and he's going to study the volcano while doing it.
As they are sailing across the Bay of Naples toward Vesuvius, the conditions become apocalyptic. Dense, hot ashes are falling on the ships. Pumice stones, blackened and shattered by fire, are raining down onto the wooden decks.
It must have been terrifying.
The sea is suddenly retreating due to the volcanic earthquakes, and the shoreline is blocked by massive debris. The pilot of his flagship is terrified and begs Pliny to turn the ship back to safety, and Pliny gives this legendary, almost cinematic response.
I love this quote.
He looks at the pilot and says, "Fortune favors the bold. Conduct me to Pomponianus."
He sails right past the point of no return.
They manage to land at Stabiae, a few miles down the coast where his friend Pomponianus is waiting, absolutely terrified. And how does Pliny react to being in the middle of a literal rain of fire?
This is the craziest part to me.
I want you to picture this scene because it is the ultimate, final manifestation of his daily routine. The earth is rocking violently, flaming stones are falling from the sky is pitch black with ash even though it's daytime, people are shrieking.
Total chaos.
What does Pliny do? He asks for a bath.
Of course he does.
He eats a meal. And then he calmly goes to sleep. And his nephew makes a point to note that the servants waiting outside the door could hear his loud snoring because he was a heavy, asthmatic man.
It's an astonishing display of stoicism, or, well, perhaps sheer exhaustion. I mean, he is treating the apocalypse with the exact same scheduled rigor he applied to a normal Tuesday in Rome. Bath, dinner, sleep. He refuses to let the exploding mountain disrupt his routine.
But the ashes and pumice are piling up so fast in the courtyard outside his door that his friends realize if he sleeps much longer, he'll be physically buried in the room.
He won't be able to open the door.
Exactly. So they wake him up, they hold a council and decide they have to leave the house because it's collapsing from the earthquakes. They tie pillows to their heads with towels to protect themselves from the falling rocks, and they make a run for the shore to see if the sea has calmed enough to sail.
The sea is still too violent.
Right. It is. The waves are too huge. Pliny lies down on a sail that was spread out for him on the beach. He asks for cold water twice and drinks it. And then the flames and the overwhelming smell of sulfur approach them.
The toxic gases from the volcano.
Yes. His friends scatter. Pliny tries to stand up with the help of 2 enslaved servants, but he instantly collapses and dies. His nephew attributes it to suffocating from the dense sulfurous vapor, noting he always had a weak chest and a narrow throat.
His death perfectly encapsulates the 2 overriding pressures of his life. He was on that beach because of his duty to the Roman people, the rescue mission. But he stayed, he observed, and he died because of his insatiable need to be present with nature, even in its most terrifying destructive form.
He really did.
He died exactly as he lived, actively engaging with the world, pushing his physical limits to the breaking point, and absolutely refusing to retreat.
He was literally sailing into an exploding volcano, and the sources suggest that up until the very end, he was dictating notes about the changing shape of the ash cloud to his secretary.
It's just breathtaking.
It really is. So let's briefly recap the awe-inspiring and honestly slightly terrifying work ethic of Pliny the Elder. Here was a man who viewed sleep as a failure of the human condition. A man who slept in fractions, read while being scraped in the bath, rode in a litter just to avoid wasting walking time, scolded his friends for costing him 10 lines of text, and ultimately wrote a foundational text of human history.
A text that For all its flaws and, riding elephants and fish-stealing octopuses served as the primary scientific authority for Europe for over 1,000 years. It was the blueprint for how humanity organized knowledge.
Exactly. So, to you listening, the next time you feel overwhelmed by your endless to-do list, or the next time you feel a pang of guilt for taking a 20-minute nap on a Sunday afternoon, just remember Pliny.
Remember the crushing weight of his existence.
Yeah. Remember that even the guy who tried to read literally everything ended up including a story about an 800-year-old king because he was moving too fast to critically think about what he was consuming. It is okay to log off. It is okay to put the book down. It is okay to just sit in the bath and relax without a scribe reading to you. You are allowed to rest.
Very well said.
But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought.
All right, let's hear it.
Pliny firmly, passionately believed that there was no afterlife. He wrote that the immortal soul was a delusion. He thought that death was the absolute final end of consciousness. The lights go out and you return to the void.
Right.
And yet, because he sacrificed his sleep, his leisure, and ultimately his very life to document the world, because he aggressively squeezed every drop of utility out of his nights, we are sitting here 2,000 years later, intimately discussing his daily routine.
That's true.
We know about his uncle, his friends, his annoyance at dinner parties, his snoring, his thoughts on eclipses. Did his extreme, arguably toxic obsession with productivity actually grant him the exact immortality he insisted didn't exist?
Wow. He built a monument out of words and sheer source of will, and he basically engineered his own eternity.
Something for you to ponder. Let that sit with you, catch up on your sleep, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.